The full fight of Jack Hanma versus KAORU Hanayama, with Jack Hanma now throwing a punch at KAORU Hanayama, leading with his right foot as Jack punched down towards Hanayama's face, and Jack's fist was inches away from landing. However, Hanayama did not seem to be troubled in the slightest, as an extremely quick movement was then shown and a hit was landed. But it was not Hanayama that had been hit, but it was rather Jack Hanma that had taken the impact. Hanayama had managed to rotate his body entirely, leading to an almost perfect hook landing in the middle of Jack Hanma's face, and Hanayama had done all of this mere milliseconds before he would have been hit by Jack. And in the process of punching Jack, Hanayama had actually managed to dodge Jack's attack in the process. This punch from Hanayama left Jack flying backwards into the air sideways as Jack's face was left impacted. Whoa, a fight. The crowd seems to have not actually anticipated this fight to actually happen. Jack's head had then landed onto the ground and he was stunned as his eyes rolled around in his head. However, Jack was not unconscious yet. Jack had landed onto his neck, with the lower half of his body starting from his torso, being held into the air by Jack's neck. Jack had moved his legs and leaped onto his knees, taking on somewhat of an animalistic stance, as if Jack was a lion, as Jack also had his mouth open and teeth clenched. And as this was happening, Hanayama and a member of his organization were both confused and intrigued at what was about to happen. However, that is, up until Hanayama had looked down at his fist. Hanayama looked far less confused as he noticed that his knuckle had been completely sliced open and was bleeding. This is the first time that I've seen the boss's fist bleed, and Jack had then said, "You got a little something on your hand there, but me, I'm fine." As Jack then proceeded to tap onto his titanium teeth, with Jack's teeth withstanding the force of Hanayama's punch, as these teeth are practically a part of Jack's jaw, meaning Jack's teeth can only practically break if Jack's jaw also breaks in the process. However, Jack had not managed to enrage Hanayama, as he had simply taken his injured fist and put his hands up into his signature stance, and everyone around began to have a far more serious look on their faces as Hanayama was then ready to continue this battle. And this is when a man in the crowd spectating this fight had then began to imitate Hanayama's stance. I had heard about this. This is how Hanayama KAORU forgoes defense in favor of total and absolute offense. It cannot be called a martial art, it is just not quite there. It is more of a comparison of strength, with Jack now facing Hanayama. It is a matter of which of us wields the greater brute force, but it is not just some contest, it is what makes a fight. Hanayama then began to wind up his punch, and this is the iconic punch that Hanayama often utilizes. With the zeal that he has for that simplicity, I can see now, this guy is bad news. As Jack was then yet again hit into his face, the Brawling Master's full force punch caves in Jack's face a second time. Will the Brawler's domination continue? Jack was sent flying back after facing the second strike from Hanayama, and Jack had landed tumbling backwards, which goes to show just how strong Hanayama truly is. Jack had landed flat onto his back with his head cracking against the pavement. It appeared so bad that people had begun worrying for the biting cyborg. Wow, whoa, is he dead? But it appears Hanayama was not as concerned, as he seemed unfazed, with Hanayama most likely knowing that Jack would not die to such an attack. And Hanayama was correct, as Jack had then began to get back up off of the pavement. Jack had then began to put on a certain look on his face that seemed far more serious than how he had seemed before. Hanayama began to slightly smirk as Jack had opened his mouth, showcasing his titanium set of teeth. Jack had then took his thumb and began pressing his thumb against one of his titanium teeth, as it seems that the reason that Hanayama was smirking is the fact that Hanayama's punch actually managed to bend one of Jack's teeth, which, just to remind you, is made of titanium. Jack had set his tooth back into place as he continued to keep his mouth open. He is pushing the bent teeth back in with his fingers. What resolve Jack has. And we are now being brought back a couple days before this current battle began taking place, and Hanayama is sitting in a room speaking to his associate Kizaki. It was back in the ancient times that the jaw was acquired by vertebrates. It was about 430 million years ago, and Hanayama then questioned exactly what his associate was talking about. "What are you talking about?" "Sir, it is Mr. Jack. He is a special case. You have to consider him as a completely different kind of creature, and it appears Hanayama had now become more interested in this conversation. Anyways, getting back to my story, until about 430 million years ago, the creatures that fish would feed on were tiny microorganisms found in mud, and there in that feeble existence, a revolutionary transformation had occurred, and that is the jaw. And you may be wondering, why is it so important? It was important because the jaw gave these creatures the ability to bite down larger prey into smaller pieces, and later on they would then go on to develop limbs, but the jaw alone has constantly remained almost unchanged, even now. And all of that is to say that the jaw is the most complete part of us. Hanayama then began to look up and face his associate. It appears that Kizaki expected Hanayama to care more about this, but Kizaki had then simply stated that he guesses that all of what he had said was a little complicated. But with Mr. Jack, the rather unique belief that he holds is that it is not the punch and not even the kicks, but biting which is mankind's ultimate weapon. I am curious myself about that purity of his, or maybe I should rather say that it is just a little bit frightening. As Kizaki had then began sweating and clenching his hand, Hanayama then seemed to have put on a far more serious face, with Hanayama most likely now realizing how hard of a fight this will be. Jack had gotten back up and recovered from Hanayama's punch. Jack had his mouth still wide open and clenched, with Jack's bent tooth still being visible even though he had attempted to bend it back into place. Jack had then said, "Time to take a bite," as Hanayama had then taken his fist and put up his classic stance as he still had blood on his knuckle. And it appears that Hanayama is about to understand what Kizaki was talking about. Mankind's weapon, the fist, and its opponent, the pinnacle of 430 million years of evolution, from the sumo of old to the ancient Olympics, with the insanely strong sumo wrestler Nomi no Sukune and two most likely Greek fighters being shown. You will find no fighting style without defensive technique, with boxing, karate, and even sumo being shown as an example. And yet, once again, KAORU Hanayama has chosen to take his usual stance. You have left yourself wide open entirely of your own will, with Hanayama not even showing the slightest intention of defending himself. And because of this, Jack is currently assuming that Hanayama is attempting to compete with him in a contest of strength. Both Jack and Hanayama have serious looks on their face, with Jack being seemingly unimpressed and unfazed by Hanayama's stance. This is when Jack Hanma had then slouched down so that he was closer to Hanayama's height and put up a very similar stance as Hanayama's. Who has the greater strength? Who has the superior body? And which of us is more of a man, Mr. Hanayama? Jack had then proceeded to throw a straight jab with his left hand, which just so happens to be the side of Hanayama's where he cannot see, due to his eye injury that he had sustained during his fight with Musashi Miyamoto, which had left Hanayama blinded on his left side. As Hanayama had taken the impact of Jack's punch, Jack had instantly grabbed Hanayama by the wrist and uppercutted Hanayama while holding him still. What a childish way to live, the pure naivety of a schoolgirl. Jack then continued to pummel Hanayama, giving Hanayama no time to recover, as Jack had then thrown another extremely strong jab to Hanayama's stomach. As Jack was still holding Hanayama still, which has prevented Hanayama from getting away from any of these attacks by Jack. Jack had then utilized his grip onto Hanayama's wrist and began a judo throw. Like maple syrup, it is sweet but simple at the same time, and the crowd was going crazy. Is that judo? Jack had planted his left foot and successfully judo thrown KAORU Hanayama. That little fantasy of yours is not practical at all. Hanayama's face had been thrown against the floor, and after being thrown into the air with his judo throw by Jack, Hanayama was laid out with his back facing the sidewalk beneath him, as Hanayama's face was also now bruised. But Hanayama is still conscious. Hanayama had stared at the sky for a second before he had then sat back up. If it is a comparison between men, I will be using techniques. Hanayama had looked to his left to try to look at Jack, but Hanayama was not able to see Jack fast enough, as Jack had snuck behind Hanayama, with Jack taking advantage of Hanayama's blind left eye yet again. Jack then began to have an extremely evil look on his face as he proceeded to lock his hands around Hanayama, as Jack then muttered to Hanayama, "Apologize to the martial arts." Hanayama was surprised as he had begun moving up into the air and was being moved with an insane amount of force. Jack Hanma has thrown a German suplex at Hanayama, and Jack's suplex takes another victim in Baki Rahen. Apologize for looking down on techniques. Hanayama landed on his back yet again, and the crowd was scared for Hanayama. He got him, whoa, right into the pavement. Jack had then rolled with his German suplex, with Jack holding onto Hanayama's shoulder and neck, with Jack wrapping his left arm around Hanayama's shoulder and wrapping his right arm around Hanayama's left arm, with both of Jack's hands gripping onto Hanayama's left shoulder. I am going to show you the newest fighting technique, as Jack had then opened his mouth and began biting into Hanayama's left shoulder and bicep area. Hanayama seems extremely surprised and, oddly enough, a bit shaken. A super low angle and super high speed suplex, and now Jack's Gaudo explodes. And we are brought right where we left off on chapter 45, with Jack still biting down onto Hanayama, as the veins in his forehead and neck indicate Jack biting down extremely hard onto Hanayama, as Hanayama is also still on the ground. Not one bit of shame. He bit him? What the? No way. He really bit him. As the crowd was horrified. He's biting him? What the hell? Is he chewing on him? Is he an animal? Jack has his neck fully extended to coincide with Jack also having a grip onto Hanayama's left arm, as Jack is holding Hanayama's arm still, with Jack seemingly having full control of Hanayama's arm. And we're then brought to a flashback with the second chairman's head subordinate, Kizaki Huichiro, to when he was talking about Hanayama's at the time future fight with Jack. Well, no. I mean, I had heard that he used biting, but I had just thought, so this is how he bites. Did it unnerve me? Well, really, I was honestly just kind of impressed, with Kizaki immediately clarifying that he was talking about Jack and not Hanayama. Oh no, by Mr. Jack, of course. I mean, who even does that, as Kizaki seems to actually get a little mad when talking about Jack's Gaudo. Biting a fellow human that way? Kizaki then sipped his tea. We human beings are animals, but we are animals that want to look good. Let's put it this way, even if you found yourself in a life or death fight and you knew you could win if you just flung your shit at an enemy, you probably still would not, would you? As an image of a guy quite literally throwing his feces at another human was then shown. Sometimes I really do question what goes on in Itagaki's mind. Of course you would not, because it looks bad. The outrageous act of biting another person to brandish without giving it even a thought. Biting is the weapon of the weak. It is rather impressive, no? Manly even, with Kizaki showing at least some level of respect for Jack. No, not a chance. He is huge. Yeah, and strong too. I have never seen a monster such as Jack before. But it is a fight, you know. There is no way that the boss will lose. We are then brought back to the present, where an insanely loud scream was heard, with the crowd being more petrified than ever and screams echoing through the streets. Even Kizaki had closed his eyes and made a facial expression in response to this loud scream. Hanayama was gripping onto Jack's left cheek with his insane grip strength, which had made Jack scream out in pain. And this also had made Jack release his bite that he had onto Hanayama, and even his hold onto Hanayama's left arm. It seems Jack had messed up when he left Hanayama's right arm unattended. Hanayama just stared at Jack, seeming unentertained by Jack's screams. Jack's bite had left a hole in Hanayama's bicep area, and he was now bleeding, and this seemed to actually make Hanayama somewhat offended, as Hanayama, while holding Jack down by his cheek, had ripped off Jack's left cheek with his hand, similarly as when Jack had recently bitten Pickle's left cheek off of his face, with Itagaki now giving yet another parallel between Jack, Hanma, and Pickle. Hanayama then dropped Jack's cheek onto the ground, with a splash noise being made as it hit the floor. Is that his cheek? Hanayama then taunted the in-pain Jack as he stood behind him. Is something the matter, buddy? Do you want to call the match? Jack had then planted his left foot onto the floor as he seemingly went for some type of kick, but Hanayama had instantly taken notice of this, and Hanayama had shut Jack down before he could even get close to Hanayama. And Hanayama had done this in the form of a left hook that landed directly onto Jack's face, which had stopped him midair. Jack had been starstruck by how hard he had just been punched, with this punch being in fact so powerful that the crowd was lost on what had made the sound that was made from Hanayama's counterattack. What was that sound? Jack's head and back had now hit the ground, with the wind seeming to have been knocked out of him. Hanayama had then leaned over the laid out Jack Hanma and asked him, "How about now? Can you keep going?" Jack had then let out a bit of a laugh while catching his breath, and we are now brought to the author's apparent hero and the father of modern karate, the late Masutatsu Uyama. It has been said that this man was capable of the following. Atop his index and middle finger, he would place a 10 yen coin. He would then take his thumb and he could twist the coin with only his thumb. And what is more is, you get it right, what it means if I could do that. Mazutatsu's hand was then shown being placed onto someone's ear, similarly to how his hand was placed onto the coin that he had bended. And Mazutatsu was then shown ripping this person's ear off. Or even this, with him now being shown ripping someone's nose and even mustache off. I can rip off any bit that I want, with Mazutatsu seeming extremely proud of this. Any bit. And we are now back into the present, with Jack Hanma being on his back after Hanayama had landed a left hook onto him. How about it? Are you done, Jack? With Hanayama standing over him, Jack had gave a blank stare as he was breathing heavily on the floor. And it seems that he was trying to catch Hanayama off guard, as Hanayama had then asked, "Can you go on?" Before Hanayama would then smile and rotate his leg around the front part of Hanayama's lower body and moved his other leg around the back of Hanayama, and Jack's head is facing Hanayama's leg with his hands also being wrapped around his right leg. The crowd seemed shocked yet again, while Hanayama's associate Kizaki seemed concerned by this move. Jack had his hands latched onto Hanayama's leg, with Jack having a blank stare before he would then open his mouth, surprising Hanayama and biting down onto Hanayama's leg, seemingly as hard as he possibly could as well, which is indicated by the veins bulging out of Jack's forehead. He bit him again. He bit his leg. Jack is in the fetal position around Hanayama's right leg, with blood now seeping through Hanayama's pant leg. He is bleeding. Hanayama had then reached down onto Jack's left leg and lashed his hand onto Jack's shin. Oh boy, with a drop of sweat now going down Kizaki's cheek, and Hanayama had squeezed down onto Jack's leg, leaving Jack shocked instantly. Jack screamed out in pain with his eyes going in different directions. Hanayama pulled off the cloth of Jack's pant leg as well as his skin, leaving Jack jumping back, unlatching from Hanayama's leg, and to some extent panicking. Hanayama had discarded the piece of skin and cloth by tossing it aside. While Jack was on the floor holding onto his leg, the crowd was horrified, but Kizaki remained unfazed, with complete and utter confidence for his boss. What came to Kizaki's mind was this same grip being used to tear people apart, with the karate master shown earlier, Mazutatsu's torn coin now being shown next to Jack's torn skin. He would tear off a piece and toss it aside. Hanayama then said, "Yes, that is that," which was probably due to Jack rolling around, shaking, and screaming in pain while holding onto his wound. Powerful, simple, and pure. And Jack Hanma is screaming extremely loudly, with his yells echoing off the walls throughout the entire city, with everyone being alerted of Jack's pain, and Jack is still on the floor holding onto his knee, which had its skin ripped off by Hanayama's pinch. The power that can twist a 500 yen coin, gripping and tearing the flesh of a leg, as a more in-depth visual of what Hanayama had done to Jack was then shown. Yeah, that must hurt like hell. Jack is rolling around and sweating from the pain, while Hanayama is just sitting there quietly staring at Jack, seeming unentertained. I guess that is that. Jack had then planted his hand onto the floor and stood straight back up as soon as he heard the match was about to end, with Kizaki and the audience of course being stunned by this, as Jack looks like an absolute tweaker, which is most likely due to a combination of him being angry and in pain. I saw clear as day. You saw? Completely reading an opponent is possible, but only with a distance. In a small distance such as grappling or wrestling, you really have no way of predicting your opponent. You have been pinched, plucked, gripped, ripped, and torn apart in general. Just what exactly do you see? With a question mark then being shown above Hanayama's head as he was mocking Jack. However, there is not one person there that was going to ask that, with one of the police officers asking for their captain as he is most likely highly confused on what to do in this situation. Jack then took on a striking stance with him still breathing heavily and sweating, and Hanayama seemed a little more intrigued but still unfazed nonetheless, as Hanayama had then took a step towards Jack, and Jack had thrown a left jab which connected onto Hanayama's face, with Jack now throwing some emotion into his punches. He then took another step forward as Jack then landed an insane right kick onto Hanayama's jaw and throat area, with Hanayama being kicked backwards into the air and Kizaki being shocked by this. While Jack had nothing but rage on his mind, the crowd began cheering as Hanayama had landed onto his back. Hanayama was laid out. Is he dead? He went flying. Hanayama then began taking in a massive breath through his nose as he then blew the breath out and sat back up. Kizaki had thought, yup, this is about over. Hanayama had began getting back up onto his feet, but as he was on a knee and almost stood up, Jack began to get extremely happy, and he made sure to take advantage of this as Jack had quickly stepped towards Hanayama and landed a right leg kick to Hanayama's head, with this kick seeming particularly strong. In a flash, he lets loose a kick on the fallen man. And we are right where we left off, with Jack throwing a kick at Hanayama with some text that says, "the finishing blow." However, it seems that Hanayama has countered this kick, judging by Jack's shocked and potentially even slightly concerned face. Rather than stopping Jack's kick by grabbing or dodging his leg, Hanayama actually stopped the kick with his fist, as Hanayama placed his knuckles on Jack's shin, with a mish sound even being made. Did it break? Wait, which one broke? As Hanayama's right hand and Jack's right shin was then shown. That was a hell of a sound, but your fist and my shin, both of them are fine, as Jack then planted both of his feet onto the floor, showing that he truly was left unharmed by this attack. He is talking. He is totally calm. It is a fist so solid and a grip so strong that you could crush your own fist, as Hanayama then remained unentertained. It is solid to be sure, but no bones were broken, as Jack's foot was then shown. An officer then stepped towards the police chief and said, "Chief, we really should step in," but the chief was locked into this fight. "You did not catch on, did you? This is not a fight. You cannot even call it violence. It is a discussion, and this is most definitely violence." Because immediately after this was said, Jack had changed positions and threw a right punch at Hanayama, but Kizaki remained unworried. Jack landed this punch directly onto Hanayama's face, but it was not the punch that Jack was truly attempting to land, but it was rather a chokehold. Oh, he got him in a choke. Jack then wrapped his right arm around Hanayama's neck, and Jack actually jumped up and completely locked a chokehold on Hanayama, with Jack mounting Hanayama's back. But yet again, Jack was not after the chokehold, but he was rather setting himself up into a position where he could bite into Hanayama's neck. And Jack had actually managed to land the bite onto Hanayama's left trap, which was the same strategy that he had used against Nomi no Sukune. And Jack is doing this because the trapezius muscle is the first muscle to engage when you pick something heavy up. He bit him, as Jack was then shown on the next panel being completely wrapped around Hanayama. And because of how long Jack's limbs are, his legs are poking out like 3 feet from Hanayama. Blood was flying out of Hanayama's trapezius, and Hanayama's hands were making a twisting motion, as Hanayama had then grabbed Jack's forearm and began twisting it as if it were a wet towel. And Jack's arm was not looking too good, as blood had began pouring out of his now twisted forearm. Both Hanayama and Jack are now both bleeding a lot, though Jack more than Hanayama, as Jack's arm still looks like it's facing the wrong direction slightly. And judging by Jack's facial expression, he is having a terrible time right now, while Hanayama on the other hand seems to be okay and unfazed with his injury. Yup, there it is, wringing his wrist out like an old towel. That one really hurts. As Kizaki then demonstrated what Hanayama had done to Jack. "You know, boss, you really should not do that." A towel wringing far beyond the norm. And we are in the perspective of Hanayama. It was my first year of middle school. I was 13. I did some pretty stupid things back then too. A 13-year-old Hanayama's arm was then shown being extended, as another student had asked him if he was ready, before this student would then proceed to twist Hanayama's arm as if it were a towel, instantly triggering Hanayama and causing him to scream and shake in pain, as his bully had stood there amused by this. It was unbelievably painful. In the name of that powerful technique, towel wringing. There is a bit of a trick to it, as this bully seems to have not been extremely strong, as the teenage Hanayama's arm was ultimately alright, with just a red mark being left on his arm and no permanent injury. To execute this technique, you have to make sure that there is no gap, and that is it. The person who had used this on Hanayama was a teen named Yoshida, who was not great in school and was not exactly very strong, but when it came to fighting and the towel wringing method, he was extremely gifted. And now we are brought back to the present, where Hanayama has executed the wringing technique on Jack's forearm, causing it to explode and shoot blood out, though Jack's old bite is still causing Hanayama to also blast some blood out of his shoulder as well. As we then receive a much closer look at Jack's forearm, and it is seriously messed up, as the muscle fibers in his arm are now showing through the surface, and there is no skin left to cover them. Hanayama Kaoru has in the past taken a tire with his bare hands and torn it apart with ease. A grip capable of shedding a tire, and when you apply that kind of power to the towel wringing technique, it is no longer some childish prank. but rather a deadly technique. And as we can see Hanayama using this technique on Jack, Hanayama's grip strength is really put into perspective, as Jack's pumped up arm was smushed down and contorted. The police and Hanayama's associate were left shell-shocked by the brutality from Hanayama. Though this fight is not over. Hanayama had then thrown a perfect left kick to Jack's head with yet again an insane level of speed and seemingly power as well. He kicked him, a Yakuza kick, with the crowd being just as surprised as me at the fact that Hanayama has successfully executed a perfect kick to Jack's face. Jack was knocked back and Hanayama knew this was his chance to strike and did not let up or disappoint. Hanayama threw another kick, this time with his right leg to Jack's stomach, which as we all know, if executed correctly, this kick could be deadly. And in this case, it most certainly would be for any average human, as Jack's body had begun to shake as his eyes widened. What an insane kick, that's gotta have done him in. It is not the kick of a martial artist, and yet it is a very rational kick. A liquid was then seen hitting the ground. It was Jack puking, holding onto his stomach, and I cannot imagine how bad that kick would hurt on a full stomach. He chucked up, but Hanayama was not done. He is going for the knockout. Yet again, Hanayama kept the pressure on and is insanely locked in. Jack was launched to the floor headfirst into the ground, as both blood and puke was flying rampantly through the air, as Hanayama was still standing tall and proud. And in my opinion, this panel has to be one of, if not the best panel of Baki Rahen thus far. Itagaki was locked in, but the police were done with this fight and said that this is enough, we're going in. Nobody move, police, stop right there. And they have finally moved in and interfered, roguely of course though, as the police chief wanted nothing to do with getting in the middle of these two monsters. And though we were all under the impression that the police's interference would not affect this fight, I think Itagaki had hit us with an insane hezi, and this may just be the end of Jack Hanma versus KAORU Hanayama. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed and would like to support me, then you can leave a like and subscribe. It is completely free on your end and helps me out way more than you may think. And if you would like to interact with me, my community, show off your art, drop some memes, talk in general, or maybe even self-promote, then you can join the Discord that can be found in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching until the end, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!